Wonderful. Great. Then we'll also, at the very beginning, whilst we are still waiting for a couple of people, we will just go through the agenda of the meeting. If we can just skip to the next slide, Chanel. Great. So at the very beginning, we'll have a starting poll just to see who's in the room and what your experience is so far with COP. Then we'll have some introductions from the two co-hosting organizations of this event, which are ClimaTalk and ChangemakerXchange. And then we will get an introduction to COPs and the UNFCCC by our ClimaTalk COP29 co-lead Annabelle. I will also be moderating the rest of the event. Then Amal will be giving an input on climate finance. Thank you for waving, Amal, at COP29. And she is extremely experienced with anything climate finance and youth engagement at COPs and UNFCCC. And at the end, we'll have a panel and Q&A. So we'll have some open questions, and then you will also be able to ask your own questions at the end. And then we'll have an ending poll and some closing remarks. But first, Chanel, if you want to, excellent. Since we are quite a few people here and we might have more people join, we will leave everybody muted at all times, just to avoid any disruptions. However, you are absolutely welcome to use the chat to communicate as you've already been doing. That's fantastic. And for any questions, we will also use Slido. So Slido is an application where you can upvote questions from other participants. So if there is somebody who's asked a really good question that you would also like to hear the answer to, please upvote the question on Slido. You can already scan the code, and then thank you, Nick, has already shared the link in the chat as well. We will share this a few times. But please use Slido because this is where we will be checking the questions. And because we won't be able to answer all questions today, we want to answer the questions that are most interesting to everybody who is here. And also, yeah, please be respectful and kind towards the other participants and the panelists when asking questions and also in the chat as you've already been doing, which is fantastic. Right, then I will start the first poll just to see who is in the room. And you should all be able to see a poll pop up on your screens. And so we're asking how experienced you are with COP, and that we also know who's in the room and what we should consider when explaining things, and also which country you're joining from so that we can see how international the room is today, which is always very nice to see. Excellent. So we have many responses already, which is fantastic. We've got currently about 50% who are here who are completely new to COP, which is brilliant. Then we have 30% approximately who know the basics. A bit less than 10 have a good level of knowledge, and also about 10% have already attended one or more COPs. This is great. I'm going to leave it open for a bit longer because I can see that there are still more responses coming in. I'm aware that there is no absolutely correct answer to everything. Just kind of respond how you feel and how comfortable and confident you feel with COP. Excellent. Perfect. And I'll leave this open for another while. And in the meantime, I'll give you an introduction to our work at ClimaTalk, and I will ask one of the other co-hosts to keep admitting people into the webinar as you see them come in. That would be fantastic. Great. So ClimaTalk. I'm Emma. I'm the founder and CEO of ClimaTalk. And ClimaTalk is aiming to solve one big problem. And as you're probably aware, a lot of us in our generation feel very worried about the climate crisis. However, only 8% know one or more articles of the Paris Agreement. And this applies to climate policy in general. And this means that we are losing a lot of potential of incredibly motivated and passionate young people who would like to get engaged, but actually don't know how and feel overwhelmed, as I did as well, and I still do many times in climate policy. And so with Climate Talk, we demystify climate policy and empower young people in the fight for climate action. And we make climate policy accessible, we make it digestible, and we make it actionable. And so we have an amazing team of over 100 volunteers from over 30 countries. You can see most of them in the map behind you, and then also in 6 continents, which is fantastic. And we're really proud of our team of amazing volunteers. One of our main activities is our youth-led climate publication, where in just 4 years we've created a trusted resource that is both accessible and scientifically grounded, where we've empowered thousands of young people to engage with climate policy. We've written about 500 articles covering over 15 areas of climate policy. All of them are scientifically referenced and also follow a rigorous two-step editorial process where we maintain very high quality standards and have reached young people across 188 countries. We also have a global university courses map. So anybody who is interested in pursuing a university degree in climate policy or climate and environmental studies in general, you can check out our map. There's a full filtering system as well, and over 500 or about 500 courses that are currently available that our team of volunteers has researched. We also have a youth climate lawsuits database. That's where you can find accessible summaries and commentaries of youth climate lawsuits brought by young people against governments or corporations around the world. Most importantly for this webinar, we have conducted award-winning live coverage from 5 international climate conferences. So since COP26, we've been to COP27 and COP28, and also the Bonn intersessional conferences. So for those of you who are not that familiar with the concept, in Bonn, there are intersessional conferences that take place at about the half point between 2 COPs. And we've produced over 350 pieces of COP content. So for instance, weekly recaps during COPs, guides, ABCs of climate COPs, and we'll have many more fact sheets, interviews, articles coming out. There's also one youth guide that we're putting together with ChangeMakerXchange that will be published at the end of this week. So do keep an eye out for that as well. And yeah, please do follow us to keep updated. We're most active on LinkedIn and Instagram. And now I will pass to Nick for the ChangeMakerXchange introduction.
Thanks so much, Emma. And wow, welcome everybody. Super big crowd here today. I think one of the most packed Zoom calls we've hosted for a long time. So you're all very welcome, and seeing namastes from Nepal, from Libya, from Somalia, Zambia, Kenya, Ghana. So awesome to see so many people here. Feels like youth and COP and climate is where the importance is right now. So I'll keep it short because I know you want to get straight to the action on the COP tips, but give you a quick overview of what we're doing at ChangeMakerXchange. And our raison d'etre and everything we do is about helping some of the world's leading young change makers, so activists, innovators, social climate entrepreneurs, to thrive. And we do this mainly through different thematic programs around climate democracy. And I think, as many of you know, I don't need to tell you, young people are bringing some of the most innovative entrepreneurial solutions to the planetary crisis. And our research shows that now over a third of young change makers are working on climate, a massive increase over the last 2 years. But this is a real challenge. You know, you're a 21, 22-year-old, 18-year-old, 26-year-old, working, really dedicating your life to this can mean that you're lacking personal financial security, that you're juggling responsibilities, other jobs on the side, and also issues like well-being and burnout are also really present for the young people we're seeing in our network. So we try and support with these challenges, and we have a global program called Changemakers for the Planet, which is all about connecting, supporting, and amplifying the impact of young climate leaders all around the world, working across all the different dimensions of the planetary crisis. So biodiversity, we have right now happening the biodiversity COP in Cali as well, air, land, and sea pollution, and of course the climate crisis. And just a couple of very quick examples: people like Marie in Europe, who's regrowing and regenerating coral reefs; Matisse, who's leading digital campaigns targeting the finances of fossil fuel industry; Jose, working on mobilizing indigenous youth in the Amazon; or Alan, training youth to be gorilla conservationists in Uganda. And we take them all through a program of both capacity and community building. We're a registered observer of the COPs, meaning we get accreditations, and we've had many members present at the last two COPs, bringing important perspectives on everything from climate finance, climate tech, youth participation, relaying messages back home in their own languages to different audiences, and platforming often really important voices around gender, around indigenous rights, and lots more. Yeah, so it's a real pleasure to be collaborating with ClimaTalk on this, and I invite you to our website to check out more information, see when our next open applications for the programs are. I'm going to drop the link in the chat right now. And yeah, watch this space for our toolkit together with ClimaTalk on how to navigate COP29. So this will be the event version, and then at the end of the week, if you follow us on social media, you'll see that you'll find that toolkit as well. Lovely to connect, and I hand back to Emma Annabelle from ClimaTalk now.
Perfect. Thank you, Nick. And I can attest to the brilliant programs of ChangeMakerXchange. Both Amal and I have participated and have loved it. So please do check them out. And yeah, passing to our lovely COP29 co-lead, Annabelle, for an introduction to COPs.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Emma. And so again, the intended goal of this event is to make COP conferences less abstract and more real and comprehensible for youth, and provide training for young people attending COP for the first time. So whether you're going to be attending on the ground in Baku, or you're going to be following these proceedings at home, I hope that this section going over some of the technicalities of the UN's climate change conferences is going to be helpful in some way. So let's just dive right in. So the UN Conference of Parties is an annual gathering established in 1992, where nations bound by the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, otherwise commonly referred to as the UNFCCC, convene to strategize on global climate challenges and address climate change. So the first of these meetings was held in 1995 in Berlin, Germany. And the COP meetings in general are attended by nearly 200 countries, as well as NGOs, civil society groups, and other all types of stakeholders. If we could go to the next slide. So you may have noticed that each year it's held in a different location, and that's because the presidency of COP shifts between the 5 recognized UN regions, and these 5 regions are Asia, Africa, Latin America, Central and Eastern Europe, and Western Europe, and other states. So each of these regions can host the COP, although individual nations pursue the host candidacy on their own. So for example, 2 years ago, COP27 was hosted by Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, representing the African region. Next year, COP30 will be hosted in Brazil for Latin America. If we can go to the next slide. So the COP hosts high-ranking representatives of each government in formal negotiations, while also hosting various side meetings, workshops, and lobbying actions. So, for instance, COP29 will be the sixth meeting of the parties to the Paris Agreement, as well as the 19th meeting of the parties to the Kyoto Protocol. And so, side events often have folks and topic experts discussing the outcomes of the more formal negotiations in like a panel style session. And there's a range of workshops that delegates can attend as well throughout the 2 weeks. And they're often a really good opportunity for youth to platform their organizations and their work. So, for example, recently the SDG Pavilion at COP29 just closed applications from member states and UN entities, as well as multi-stakeholder representatives, to host events under the theme of collective action and achieving the SDGs. So whether it's like a interactive workshop, exhibit, even a gallery or a panel, there's a lot of different types of events to be found at these conferences. We can go to the next slide. So the COP is essentially the highest decision-making body, and it enables countries to assess progress, negotiate agreements, and set climate targets. So, for example, during the Paris Agreement, which was COP21 in 2015, parties aimed to limit global warming to below 2 degrees Celsius. So this is a very, very, I guess, well-known outcome of COP. And following this Paris Agreement to limit global warming, COPs now focus on ratifying these previously agreed upon, I guess, mechanisms and goals. And so they might not have, as conclusive or as like a, I guess, sensational outcome as every single previous COP. We can go to the next slide. And so you can see a little diagram there, kind of helping to illustrate just the different relationships between different working bodies and kind of like the authority structure there. But countries focus on implementing their climate commitments and reporting on progress and building capacity between COP conferences. So even between COP conferences that happen annually, there's work being done. There are pre-COP negotiations to refine climate strategies. There are commitments that are being updated, as well as addressing outstanding issues. And the SBSTA also occurs in preparation for the COP, where key points for the COP agenda are negotiated. You can go to the next slide. And so, what is the end result of all of these annual conferences? So, the ultimate goal is to formally adopt climate change agreements and commitments. Sometimes there are successes, but not every COP, again, has such a sensational outcome or even is as successful as the rest. So, again, Paris Agreement, COP21, that's a very, very well-known success. The Glasgow Climate Pact was also pretty widely known. But not all COPs have these notable outcomes. So, for example, COP17 and COP15 were crippled by tensions between negotiating parties. And so results can really dramatically vary at each COP, considering that success also depends on the current political and social economic climate, right? Like these world leaders aren't really coming to COP and then forgetting about everything that's happened over the past year. A lot of their negotiations, just like any other political proceeding, is informed by, the current state of the country as well as what's going on in the world in general. We can go to the next slide. So looking ahead, some political scientists and topic experts have put together this very thorough article, not necessarily predicting the outcomes of COP29, but more so just providing context and setting the theme with different thematic areas of focus. So if you're planning on attending COP this year or planning on following the conferences from home, it's always really helpful to again understand the social or socioeconomic, geopolitical context that this conference is being held in. So I'll just speak a bit about some of the main points that this article highlighted. Firstly, the COP29 aims to be a quote-unquote truce COP with a call for a 1-month global ceasefire during the attendance. The Deputy Foreign Minister of the Republic of Azerbaijan, as well as the chief negotiator for COP29, has said that this initiative is inspired by the Olympic Games truce. And he said this during an event in Brussels. And so the call for truce is kind of not only to promote peace, but because military activities around the globe as well are the source of around 5 to 6% of global emissions, which is a very significant chunk. Next, let's move on to the updated NDCs. So NDCs stand for Nationally Determined Contributions, and they're the climate goals of individual countries under the Paris Agreement. And so most, if all not, countries were supposed to submit their goals to basically reduce greenhouse gas emissions and enhance resilience by 2020. And then after that, they're updated every 5 years. And so to, I guess, quote, enhance ambition and enable action. Workshops are also being organized to support countries in submitting their plans as soon as possible before the COP. And so the deadline for the NDC is set for February of 2025. And then the biannual transparency reports, otherwise known as BTR, by 31st of December this year. But countries are really encouraged to submit their plans, including their national adaptation plans before the next COP starts to generate, I guess, a sort of momentum. And then in 2009, or sorry, Article 6, first of all. Article 6 is always a really hot topic. And so just for an extremely brief overview, Article 6 of the Paris Agreement sets out how countries can pursue voluntary cooperation to reach their climate targets and essentially enables international cooperation to tackle climate change and also unlock financial support, especially for developing countries. And so, again, the deputy Foreign Affairs Minister of Azerbaijan said that this is the second major expected deliverable of COP29, and that the current turnover in the carbon markets is about 2.2 to $2.5 billion. But if this is operationalized as desired, this figure could have the potential to increase multiple times and provide additional contributions to global climate finance. So there has been some progress made during the Bonn SB60 conference, which is the conference, again, that takes place in between COPs. And so from the 3rd to the 13th of June at the Bonn Climate Conference earlier in the summer, national delegations reconvened formal negotiations on these carbon markets in Article 6. And finally, we're also going to do a glance over at the 14 presidential initiatives. Besides a goal for a global truce, which is the first topic we talked about, the presidency of COP29, they also intended to launch 13 other initiatives. So among them are things like green energy corridors and zones, things like clean hydrogen and green energy storage, as well as accelerating climate action in tourism. And so a climate investment fund for future will be launched, and this seeks to increase the private sector's involvement in financing climate action and transition in the developing world. And so the next COP, this upcoming COP29, should be a quote unquote enabling COP. Said Jacob Worksman, who is the principal advisor at the Directorate General for Climate Action of the European Commission. And so he also stressed that it's very much about delivering our finance and that we must, undertake a transition away from fossil fuels. So it's my hope that there'll be, more of a focus again on transitioning away from fossil fuels. And yeah, the deputy director of the UNDP's representation office in Brussels also commented on this, saying that, the 1.5 degrees Celsius target is still possible, but not for long. And so there's really this urgency to seize the opportunity we have and act now. So again, this isn't to predict any outcomes of COP29, but more so to provide context and also explicitly label themes that youth might find helpful to know going into this conference, whether they'll be following from home or on the ground in Baku. So that's all from me at the moment, but living in a world that values and operates so heavily around finance, I'm sure many of us are still intrigued and curious by the finance aspect of climate and COP29, which is why I'll give the floor now to Amol to talk more about her experiences and climate finance specifics at COP29.
Thank you so much, Annabelle, for this very thorough overview. And I'm sure that for some of us who are joining this webinar being new to COP, that there is a lot of new information, and I'd encourage you all to have a look at the resources that are going to be shared. And there's always a way to navigate this. But linking to what you were saying and speaking of climate finance, I think that you might have already heard that this COP is a finance COP, and maybe this is not the first time that you would hear this adjective of a COP. It's been a while since we label every COP as a finance COP, and the reason is finance has been a very important topic, and it's been a transversal area of negotiation, but also, and most importantly for this COP in particular, the reason behind this is that an expected outcome is the negotiation and the approval of a new collective quantified goal during this COP. And for some brief context, so this goal is going to come as a successor to what we had as the 100 billion per year goal, which achieved its deadline of 2020. And then while there has been some debates whether or not this goal has been achieved by parties, to which extent this has been aligned with the mandate that has been put, there was also a mandate that was launched after Paris to establish and put together this new collective quantified goal prior to 2025. So this goal is expected to be starting from next year, and this is why this COP comes at a critical moment of the conclusion of this process. So this process started a while ago. After Glasgow in COP26, we had in the establishment of a 3-year ad hoc work program that looked after this goal in terms of consultant parties, in terms of welcoming submissions from governments or from organizing or from observer organizations, and it welcomed submissions from these entities. It also included organizing several high-level ministerial dialogues around the past 3 COPs. We took some time to talk and discuss and refine the negotiated texts between Glasgow, Sharm, Dubai, and now Baku is set to be the hopefully the final milestone to discuss this COP, to discuss this the text about this new collective quantified goal. And I shared also the draft text structure of how this is going to look like. So now if you check, you will see that what we are currently negotiating is so the preamble about this text, then the context, and then for the goal formulation, this is what talks about the expected quantum of this goal, the time frame, the thematic scope, adaptation, mitigation, loss and damage, the sources of finance, some qualitative elements, and then the transparency arrangements and the review and mechanism of this goal. And to talk about some of the key issues that currently are around or that are currently being debated in between negotiations, I would say one of the most important ones are the contributor base. So who is going to pay for this goal? So a heated debate in terms of sticking to the contributor to the common but differentiated responsibilities principles that is aligned with the historical emissions and that asks the developed countries to continue to pay versus broadening the contributor base and including some high or some rich, if I may, countries in terms of whether only the public sources of finances are the ones who are accountable, or whether the private sector should have a stronger mandate in terms of being included in this goal. And then again, in terms of the layer or the structuring of the fund, the forms of finance between concessional and non-concessional, the scope itself, adaptation, mitigation, loss and damage, whether or not there will be a prioritization for a certain type of countries or not, and then quantum, which is the amount of which the goal will be around, has been a topic that has not been addressed explicitly so far. So countries have been escaping in a way, if I'm to use some informal language, or trying to not really get into the substance of talking about the quantum. And we have seen several suggestions by several group of countries, and countries putting on the table different quantums. So this COP will finally and hopefully tackle this topic in terms of quantum and the other modalities. There has been recent recently in September one final high-level ministerial dialogue, which also addressed the political aspect of it. And then we will see how things are going to move for this COP. And if you are interested, I'm going to just copy paste in the chat some key finance resources that can also help you get to know more about the dynamics about the NCQG and the development, be it from the UNFCCC portal itself, but also from some other think tanks and some other NGOs who are closely following and working on the NCQG. With that, I'll hand it over again to you, Emma or Annabelle.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Amal. That was a great overview. And now I will pass to Annabelle for the panel and Q&A. But before that, just a little reminder, you can scan this QR code to get to the Slido where you can pose questions. And this should look like this little box in the top left. So you can type your question, we will review it, and then it will appear on the list of questions. And please also upvote questions of others that interest you, because we will be asking the most popular questions so that we can make sure that we ask the questions that are of the most interest. And we will not be asking questions that are posed in the chat. So please do ask on Slido. And now back to you, Annabelle.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So I'll be moderating the panel, and I have a set of general questions to ask every panelist, as well as some questions that have been specifically included to highlight the diverse experiences our panelists have. First, I want to give the floor to Chanel to introduce herself briefly and her experiences in relation to COP for a minute before passing it off to Emma. And then finally, Amal to introduce herself, and then we'll move into the questions. So Chanel, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself briefly.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Annabelle. Hi, everyone. I'm Chanel from Malaysia, and I'm currently the logistics and review coordinator at ClimaTalk. So in terms of experience, I've previously participated in SB58, COP28, SB60, and I will also be attending COP29 in Baku. Passing it on to Emma.
Great. Thank you, Chanel. And I would suggest also that we stop the slide share for the moment. If you could, if everybody has scanned this, and Nick will be sharing the link in the channel again, in the chat again, so that we can see the panelists. Thank you so much, Chanel. Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Great. Hi, everyone. Great to see so much interaction in this event. Really happy to see so many people. I'm Emma. I'm from ClimaTalk, and the first COP that I attended was COP26. And then I've been very involved in virtual attendance and tracking remotely for several COPs and SBs. And I also attended the SB60, which is the Bonn conference this year, so 2024. So also, if you have any questions on how to track COP virtually, I've been very involved in organizing our team to get on the ground and to track different topics. So if you have any questions concerning that, feel free to put them in the Slido as well. You're muted, Annabelle.
Yeah. Do you want me to go next, Annabelle?
Yes, that'd be great.
Awesome. Thank you. Hi again, everyone. I hope you're all doing well. I'm Amal. I'm from Tunisia. Same as Emma, COP26 has been my first one, and I joined COP26, 7, 8, and then the last SPs in Bonn. My participation has been mainly as part of the Tunisian delegation, which came within an initiative that our Ministry of Environment launched to have young people join UNFCCC COP's negotiations. I've been joining as a party delegate, negotiating on climate finance, and also multitasking and multi-hatting to make sure to represent and echo some youth initiatives. And my participation in COP28, for instance, has been also part of the CXC delegation. So I was also privileged to take part in one of the opportunities that CXC has been supporting, as Nick was sharing, being an alumna of the Changemakers for the Planet program. Besides that, I just concluded a degree in sustainable development, and I'm working as a finance youth fellow with the Climate Champions team, which is also another institution that looks after or supports the work of non-state actors across COP. So it's a nice intersection, all relating to climate finance and to COP participation.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So now I think we're ready to move into questions. It might be hard to have a bit of a more conversational panel where we bounce ideas off of each other given this virtual setting and unmuting and muting, etc. So we could also just answer questions in the same order you folks introduced yourself in and keep your answers to potentially around 2 minutes or so for the sake of time if possible. I'll also put the questions into the chat as well after I ask them for folks to refer back to and for our panelists as well if needed. And so without further ado, our first question, what motivated you to get involved in COP, whether it be the last COP or COP in general? And what has been your most surprising or impactful experience during your time there? Oh, Chanel, if you're ready, feel free to go ahead.
Great question. To be honest, my first UNFCCC conference was SB58, and really my attendance was just by chance. I was actually in a different team when I was working on ClimaTalk. I was focused on research, and Emma gave me the amazing opportunity to attend SB58. So really, when I first attended it, it was just I got thrown to the wild. I had to learn things the hard way. But since then, everything has been great. It's really a fantastic learning opportunity. Most surprising element, favorite moments. That's too many to count, honestly. But if I had to really pick one, I think it's meeting like-minded people and just being in the same space as youths and policymakers that, dedicate their entire lives and, have so much passion on climate change and, things that I personally am interested as well. So I think that is a very general answer to that.
Thanks, Chanel. I think what motivated me to first attend COP26 was this idea that, there are a bunch of very powerful people deciding our future that meet once a year. And I thought it's actually insane that I didn't know what a COP was. I didn't know what happens. I didn't know how it's structured, what people actually do, what they talk about at the conference, what they talk about before the conference. And it's really an incredibly complex topic. And so I've really wanted to see as much behind the scenes as possible and wanted to understand how these decisions that will affect all of our futures and are already affecting our present, how they are being taken, and also how young people can have a voice and how they do have a voice at these conferences.
You want me to step in, Annabelle, or? Yeah,
Yes,
sure.
that'd be great.
Yeah, for me, as I mentioned, I got this opportunity to apply and then later on get selected by our Tunisian delegation to join. And for me, like before that, COP was something I always hear about. It was like just another thing that is happening in a world where other professionals are talking about sophisticated stuff about climate. My climate engagement back then was only limited to local action I would do on a community level. I'm a scout. Connection to nature is something quite obvious and quite connected to me. But then to get into the policy side of it was a bit different from what I would do. And then to have this curiosity and then academic background of wanting to tackle some political aspect, and then to get the opportunity of receiving a training and later on go there, get confused, have this aha moment within the halls of COP COP26, and then later on building this knowledge and acknowledging that there is a huge community out there, not only of climate negotiators who are people working for ministries, but also other young people who are equally interested and equally following and knowledgeable about the process, made it a bit more interesting for me later to relate, to identify as someone who can follow the process and then to continue to do so. What would be surprising for me is that this is not like a typical conference, and I would struggle to explain or talk about it to other people. Like for a conference, you would have a set agenda, you had clear starting date, clear ending date, and for COP, it's everything but that, because agenda items change from one day to another, so you wouldn't really know what are the agenda discussions up until the end of the day, when the co-chairs sit together and then reflect based on the outcome of that day and then decide on what's going to come next. So it's always hard to stick to one plan, and then it's so huge, and then you might be like, yeah, you would agree with friends that you're gonna catch up in COP, and then 2 weeks fly by and you might not even meet, and it's so crazy and it's so packed. So for me, it was surreal to imagine that level of complication, but then at the same time know that we still can get something out of it if I am to keep myself optimistic.
Amazing. Thank you so much. The next question I have is for Chanel specifically. Chanel, you earlier mentioned it was kind of like a sudden and unexpected opportunity that popped up for you. So how did you navigate the challenges of being, such a young person in a high level and often bureaucratic space like a United Nations conference?
I'm not gonna lie, it's tough, especially especially when it was my first time. You enter the space and you realize that there's so much happening at the same time. Somehow everyone seems to know each other, and you're like, I don't know anyone at all. And sometimes it feels difficult to be able to make an impact, a real impact, in your 2 weeks at the conference. But really, to overcome it, I think a general advice I would say is don't put too much pressure on yourself in trying to make any sort of huge impact. Like, you're not going to change the world in the 2 weeks that you're going to be at COP. But really what you're there to do is the long-term impact, starting small, finding your grounds at COP, finding your grounds as a first-time delegate, really. Be kind to yourself. It's a really intense space. And once you feel like you have the capacity to really push yourself out there, to really, engage with other policymakers or engage with other youths and people entering the space, only then can you slowly start to make decisions, and putting yourself out there really is the key to it all. But really just be open to learn and be kind to yourself, as generous as that sounds, but COP it would be an understatement to say that it's not, it's intense. It's really intense, but just find your people, be kind to yourself, and you will make an impact. Even if it's not immediate, you will eventually make an impact at your time at COP, I would say.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And the next question I have is for Amal. Amal, you've had so many different experiences in these, high-level spaces. You've been a young Tunisian climate change negotiator. You were or are an advisory panel member for GFANZ as well. What strategies do you use to ensure that your voice is heard, and not just heard, but also taken seriously in the discussions that you have or at these conferences?
Thank you for the question. And yeah, these spaces can be often intimidating, and they would continue to do so, I'm assuming. And I think one particular aspect is that it's fine to recognize that we're not supposed to know everything, and I do not carry these 20 years of experience just yet, and I am putting that because of a perspective that would bring, or because I am joining that entity to get the knowledge. So I'm trying. I wouldn't say I got in peace with that, but I am working my way in terms of getting in peace with that notion of, in terms of yes, I can be an expert from a certain perspective, but less from a different one. Another key one is to also identify key or like comfort zone people who you can reach out to in terms of when you are confused or when you are not so sure about something, who can be approachable and where you can ask questions. Sometimes it's easier to ask questions on a one-on-one or on a smaller group scale as opposed to when it's a bigger entity. And then later on, when you carve your space and you acknowledge how things work out, you would become more comfortable. And then you'd see, or I learned that not everyone knows everything at the end of the day, that a lot of people are still learning, and it's just a bit more intimidating when you're a young person. But then again, you can always find a way to do this. And then I also motivate myself to try to get more learning. There are a lot of resources on the internet now, and then there are a lot of fellow friends who are following similar topics. So to go out there and to ask is quite helpful for me to understand and to get where I am. Or if I am like really not so sure about something, or I feel it's a bit not comfortable, and then ask a friend and we share the same opinion, it does not mean that like everything is going right and I'm just doubting. No, that means that that's my gut feeling, and I should trust it and should trust my opinion when it comes to that matter. So it depends from one situation to another, but it's also important to acknowledge that these confusion moments are part of the process, and it's totally fine.
Amazing. Thank you so much for providing so much insight and providing examples as well from your past experiences. Speaking of, someone who has a lot of experiences, Emma, I was wondering whether it be, during your physical attendance at COP26 or across so many of the COP conferences and SBs that you've tracked with your work and with Climate Talk, can you share an example of a moment at COP or during COP when you felt that you had individually made a meaningful impact?
I can remember when we were at SB 60 and we conducted many interviews with young people at the conference. What we do since COP26, actually, when we started very small, and then we had somebody come up to us from one of our interviewees and just tell us that they're super thankful that we're providing the space for these youth voices, because it is so difficult to also get them across to young people who are not at the conference, and to make it transparent and to really show what is happening. And I think you never really know the true impact that you're having with your work. Obviously, you can try and you can affect an outcome. You try and make changes at different levels, but I think it means a lot if you then actually see that for many people it does have an impact. And when we get messages from people around the world who find it very helpful that we provide an insight into these conferences, because they are so opaque that it is very difficult to track. And I mean, I can see all of the questions that we get in the Slido and the chat, and I'm sorry that we won't be able to address all of them. Then I don't know who's currently sharing. Thank you. And we won't be able to address all of them, but I can see that the need is definitely there, and bit by bit, we're trying to make it more transparent and more accessible for young people out there.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Chanel, the next question is for you, but Emma, you mentioned, the accessibility of these conferences, and so many youth I see in the chat are also asking how they can get involved specifically by attending these conferences. So Chanel, can you describe, I guess, your work, your role, your affiliation with the Youth Negotiators Academy in past COP? How can we effectively bridge the gap between the negotiations happening at COPs, as well as the broader public understanding of what is, actually happening and what the climate issues at hand are, and ensure that, the outcomes of these conferences really resonate with and engage broader communities around the world?
Yeah, for sure. Huge question. But I'll just start with my experience with the Youth Negotiator Academy. So if you're someone that is interested in representing your country as a young voice in the negotiating room, there is a fantastic organization called the Youth Negotiator Academy, run by four amazing women who have a huge amount of climate experience when they were youths, and they essentially provide training and also they basically help with your accreditation to enter COP. So, but from what I know is that your country, the head of your country's delegation have to agree with them. Just a couple of terms and conditions. But definitely, I think they operate. I mean, there's young negotiators from so many countries, over 150, I believe. And they've sent, I think, they've sent a lot in the past COP28. So definitely do check it out. They are doing a fantastic work. And your next question was about bridging the gap between what happens in negotiations and public understanding, I think. Right.
Yes, exactly.
So I think there's many answers to it, but I definitely think one of the do to bridge that gap is by providing accessible information, because realistically information about climate change is there. Like, the information is on the internet, and you can find BBC articles, you can find people doing deep dives, you can find even draft text from previous UNFCCC meetings on the internet. But the problem is that the language that's being used in these texts, firstly, it's mainly, I think it's mainly only in English and maybe Spanish. So if you're not very strong with your English language, you might struggle with these incredibly technical terms and technical climate language that they use. And if you don't study law as well, it's a real shocker to read your first ever policy document on what is actually happening in the negotiations. So really, it's about having more accessible information, which is the work that ClimaTalk is also doing extremely well, where we're providing we're sort of translating these incredibly difficult technical terms into everyday language, into layman terms, so that everyone, no matter your age, and no matter your level of knowledge on climate policy, anyone can try and if they're interested, anyone can try and understand it. So really, it's about having that accessible information about what's happening in those climate negotiation rooms.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And this is a perfect segue into a question for Amal. Chanel, you talked a lot about, I guess, like access to information. And Amal, given, the multiple engagements you've had either as like a young negotiator, as an advisory member panel, just your affiliation with so many different organizations and bodies, across all of these roles and conferences that you've been a part of, what is your biggest learning been for youth, and what is, I guess, like the ideal outcome in your head for global climate finance?
Okay, yeah, for a global climate finance, that's quite bigger than what we would be getting in this COP, I'm assuming. Of course, for me, it's important that we continue to align with the Paris Agreement in terms of making sure that polluter pays principle apply, in terms of making sure that we have more and more important amounts of climate finance to be put and to be committed for this new collective quantified goal, and to make sure that these forms are rather non-debt heavy on countries, not to compromise the sustainability and development goals of these countries as they are getting into their growth and progress journeys. And to link to the first part of your question, I think within the huge flow of access of information, and then those moments where we can easily get lost, I think it's important to make sure to focus on key and official channels, the UNFCCC one being the main one and the official one, where when you are joining COP, each theme or each thematic aspect will have their own dedicated communications and newsletter. There are a couple of NGOs who also facilitate the information flow by sharing a daily summary of what is happening. So then, as we know, COP is quite a lot of agenda items happening at the same time: adaptation, mitigation, global stocktake, negotiation around climate finance itself goes into many layers between, the Standing Committee of Finance, the new collective quantified goal, guidance to the Green Climate Fund, etc., etc. And as a young person, I think what I often try to do is to make sure that I justify my presence into that one event, be it COP or others. Like I really try my best to make sure to know why I am going there. It's not a simple conference hopping. It's not just me wasting some resources, putting on some carbon footprint just to fly in somewhere where I can be more more useful somewhere else. It is important to make sure that I am going there to contribute to something, to learn something, and to connect with other people, which can later on spark a meaningful partnership. So it is important that we are not being put there just to tick a box that it's a young person attending a conference, but like deep inside, I am accountable myself for being there. And I think it is quite important if we are talking about meaningful youth engagement. And then if I am going there, but I'm not really contributing and I am learning, that's also a fine outcome. So I do not also need to put more pressure on myself and to outwork myself just because I am I was selected to be there. So it's a fine balance to achieve, and it's a huge and big journey. But I think it's quite important for all of us to push ourselves to the learning bit of it and to make sure we get this responsibility, whether we choose it or not, because it's quite an important topic for our generation, and we cannot afford not to be on top of it.
Amazing. That was a beautiful answer. And I think you make a great point there. Participating in these conferences as young people, there's so much pressure and so much, I guess, chance for burnout at these conferences where we're trying to not only keep up with everything, but also make an impact and contribute in some way. So I really like what you said to learn, to lean into the learning side of yourself. The last, I guess, like facilitated panel question I have before we move into the open Q&A is for Emma. Emma, your role is quite unique. I think a lot more unique than general youth delegates. As an NGO founder, you also, deal with receiving the badges and distributing badges. Can you talk a little bit about the logistics of that, as well as accreditation? What is the difference between green zone and blue zone?
Thank you, Annabelle. And yeah, we've seen lots of questions on that, so I'm very happy to dive into this practical and logistical aspect. So the way to get into COP is to first understand that there are different zones, as some of you have already pointed out very rightly in your questions. So there's a green zone that is open to the public, and you have civil society representation, there are exhibitions, there are public events, and you can usually attend the green zone without much difficulty. Sometimes you still need a ticket if they want to limit the number, but it's generally open to the public. And then there's a blue zone, which is where the actual negotiations take place. This is where the delegates go. This is where you have the massive negotiation halls. This is where the agreements are then decided on and signed, but also where many side events are taking place and where many other activities and pavilions are hosted. Pavilions are country spaces where countries are hosting events and where countries are showcasing what they're doing in the climate space. And so this is what the accreditation is needed for, is to access the blue zone at COP. So to be able to get into that space where the negotiators are. And so for that, there are different types of what are called badges. And so a badge is basically just, a piece of a name tag, like a tag that you get when you arrive, but it's also, it means that you are admitted to enter the space. And so there are party badges, which means if you are part of an official party delegation, and party in that sense means country. So if you are negotiating on behalf of a country, then you would be part of that party delegation, and you would get a pink badge. It's the color for the party badge. There are also media badges. So if you are representing an official media organization, they get media badges. So they would then report from COP. And so these are, news outlets and other TV stations, broadcasting stations, newspapers. Then you also have the UN badges for the UN institutions, which are a bit separate, and you have observer badges as well. And observer badges are the ones that most youth delegates actually go on, aside from possibly the young people going with Youngo, as they have a partnership with the UN institutions, and so many of them go on UN badges or possibly party badges if they're linked to that party delegation. And so the observer badges are for organizations, non-profit organizations usually, that are accredited with the UNFCCC. The UNFCCC, as we've heard before, is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change with the headquarters in Bonn. And so they decide you get to apply, and you have to apply quite a bit in advance. So we had to apply as an organization before COP27 to then be accredited at COP28. So we've been accredited since COP28, and so now we can apply for our own badges, and we can then nominate people to receive a quota of a number of badges that we then have for this conference. If you don't have accreditation as an organization, you can ask other accredited organizations. There is a list, a public list of accredited organizations on the UNFCCC website where you can see all organizations that are accredited. So you can ask if any of them may have any spare badges, or you can also ask your country delegation if they have party overflow badges. So if they have too many badges that they are happy to give out to interested civil society participants that can attend. And so this is how it works. It's a bit of it's not the most straightforward process because everybody is always, basically scrambling to get a badge. Usually there are not enough badges for all people that want to attend. We also only get a small number of badges, it's in the first years we're dependent on very kind other organizations that gave us access via extra badges that they had. So it's really a sense of networking, speaking to people, emailing organizations to see if they have extra badges that they would be able to give out. Note that this is simply the access. So this has nothing to do with funding or organization. This is simply the access that you will then be able to get into the venue. I think this is most of the question answered, but I'm aware that it can be very overwhelming. So if you have any follow-ups, feel free to post them as well, and I'll try to answer them in the chat.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Emma. So like I mentioned earlier, now is the time to have your burning questions answered through the open floor Q&A. So if you did get a chance to either submit your question earlier or upvote other people's questions that you're also interested in seeing answered, that's amazing. Emma, are you able to see, I guess, the top questions that panelists would be able to answer?
Yes, you can see the questions on the shared document, Annabelle, where we already have the top questions noted down. But I can
Amazing.
already share the first one if you are looking. I think this is a good question to maybe follow up on the one that I just answered, which was, can you describe the entire process, how COP works? So maybe we won't go into the entire process, but from walking through the doors to attending, speaking on the stage. But maybe I'll pass to you, Chanel. Could you maybe give an overview of what could a typical day look like? What is it to spend a day at COP? What is it like?
Sure. So you wake up and then you get to the venue, and typically you have to do a security check. So this is after you get your badge, you do a security check, you enter the venue. The first thing that I typically tend to do is I tend to stand in front of these screens. So there are usually multiple screens throughout the venue that essentially just sort of highlights what negotiations are happening on one screen, and the other screen is what side events are happening. So typically what I like to do in the day is I get there bright and early, I look at the screen, and I sort of make a note in my calendar to see which negotiations do I want to follow, which meeting rooms I need to be in at what time. And if I have extra time, I will look at, what side events do I really want to make the most of my time with. So really, it's just the whole day, I would say you're sort of jumping in and out of different rooms. But especially at COP, there are also pavilions. So these, there are country pavilions. So it's just a room, a building of some sort. I don't know how it's going to look like at COP29, but at COP28, different countries have their own pavilions to showcase, climate developments and also climate cultures of their own countries, and you are basically free to roam around wherever you want. So really, it's hard to say what a typical day looks like. It really depends on what you want to get out of your experience at COP. If your key purpose is to be a negotiator, then you're probably going to spend a lot of time in the negotiation rooms. But if you're there as an observer, then perhaps you have a bit more time to jump around different places, different pavilions to really expand your knowledge and learn more, but also just to meet people in general. So really, the whole day is just you go to different places. There's a lot of walking involved. You eat lunch, you talk to people, you network with people, take a break, and then you jump into more meetings. And that's basically a day of life at COP. If I've missed out anything, Emma and Amal, please jump in. But yeah, I think that's a general overview.
Yeah, thank you, Chanel. I don't know, maybe I'll leave it to you, Annabelle, to decide, but I also saw another question that we had, which is like, what are the don'ts at COP, which I think also relate to this current one in terms of sharing, like, yeah, besides like knowing how a typical day would run, I would say a couple of don'ts is, first of all, maybe do not, or it might be ambitious to commit to following more than one topic. I had this beginner mistake in COP26. I thought I would be able to follow ACE, which is Action for Climate Empowerment and Finance, and that's humanly not possible as much as you would want to, but then there will be always overlapping agenda items, and it's really hard to follow, and they're always back to back. Besides the negotiation sessions, if you are in COP on the negotiating capacity, there will always be some other informal and informal ones, groups gathering. So it's not really easy to follow more than one topic. Do not underestimate how big a space can be. I would say do not wear high heels for girls unless you really have to. Make sure you have comfy shoes. It involves a lot of walking, like more than one can imagine. And do not forget your snacks. Do not forget your water bottle. I think it's quite important. You will be running between back-to-back meetings, and sometimes do not, or most of the time we wouldn't have time to properly grab a seated lunch. So I think it's important to account for that. And do not, if possible, do not commit to like back-to-back meetings, especially if they are in different spaces, especially if one is on in the venue and one is outside. That might be actually tricky. Yes, I saw a message about the laptop charger. Laptop charger is important, and if possible, charge your devices the night before. Make sure you connect with people you are planning to meet beforehand, because everyone is going to get double, triple booked by the day. So it's important that you get hold of that. And also make sure you account for some downtime. When you're done, you're done. You're not going to attend every single side event. It's not possible, and that's also fine. So make sure that you are intentional about that. So yeah, these are a couple of also do's and don'ts, and we learn this as we go, and it's different from one COP to another, but the crazy pace, I think that's quite a thing for all of them.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And we've all spoken a bit about our actual experiences while we were at COP, but there's also a question about whether or not to attend COP at all. People are asking if they are complicit if they join a petrostate hosted COP. So we saw last year in Dubai as well, there were tons of fossil fuel lobbyists there that might do things like slow down negotiations. Azerbaijan, most of their economy is also centered on oil and gas. And there have been, I see in media, some smaller NGOs or small or other environmental groups who have said that they are skipping COP29 and they're going to focus on COP30 instead, which will be hosted in Brazil. So would you say, and maybe Chanel, you can start, that people are complicit if they join a petrostate hosted COP, especially one with, massive human rights issues, or if it's, I guess, more meaningful or better to boycott?
Yeah, these ethical questions have, been huge even in last year at COP28, whether one should even be there in the first place. But I think things like this, it's not exactly black and white, where if you go, you're definitely complicit. It's not exactly like that. I think the situation is a lot more complicated and complex than, one can really put an answer to just a huge this. But what I will say is, based on my conversations at COP28 with some of my friends, we sort of had this discussion whether what we're doing here is wrong. And my friend kind of gave an analogy saying, well, imagine, you're trying to imagine there's like 200 people at the dining table and you're all trying to split the bill. And clearly, it would be a lot easier to try and figure out a way to split the bill in person than virtually. So that's kind of one way to look at things of, maybe sometimes you do need to be in person, physically attending a climate conference to really come to a conclusion. But, there are many different ways to approach and, to really see what is actually, socially acceptable, I guess. But I think what is really important is that everyone that attends COP should learn and should most definitely reflect on what you're actually doing there. So I think in order to not be complicit, I mean, again, it's difficult to say things like that, but I think what you should do is try and maximize your time when you are attending COP. Don't waste your time, because if you are wasting your time there, then you are pretty much complicit to just being a COP tourist and, joining a conference that is run by a petroleum state. But yeah, so definitely know your purpose as to why you're there. I think, that's a general answer that I can try and give to that, if anyone else has any thoughts on that.
I can follow up on that if you like. I think you already gave a really good answer to a very difficult question, Chanel. And I also think it's not black and white, and I think a good argument can be made for both cases. I completely understand the people that say we're boycotting COP20, COP29 for a various number of reasons. But at the same time, I understand the people that say, these decisions, they are going to be taken anyway, and they will affect our future. And there will be many important people there on the ground, and also many fossil fuel lobbyists. And it's better if we have as many young people who are providing a different perspective and who are loud on the ground and are fighting for our future there, than rather leaving them to themselves and take the decisions that are going to affect our future. So I think this is the two different approaches. I definitely agree that it's not black and white, never. But these are the different approaches, and I think a fair argument can be made for both of them. Amal, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And if I am to also share my own personal opinion, I would also say that, yeah, multilateralism is not the best that we've got, and things would have been way faster, or should have been way faster. But then this is the only way or modality that is still bringing everyone to the table, where we are still having a conversation, which is, as much as it's not the level of ambition that my generation would hope for, but it's the best that we can have. And honestly, to have that platform is still better than not having it at all. And I'd also like to think of it as another excuse or a trigger to put pressure on hosting presidency, because beside, like, the conference is a UN hosted conference. The space, once you enter the blue zone, it's a UN space. But then the presidency is the one who also has an active role to mediate some initiatives, to also lead some initiatives, and then to host the COP, also put some pressures, put some echo, put some spotlight. And I'm not talking about Azerbaijan particularly, but then in general, to actually lead some work when it comes to that regard. So I'd like to think about it from this perspective, but I do also understand people who think that this should not be designed this way, in that the system should be reshaped. But then with what we have now, I think that this is the best outcome that we have, and we should make it work with the current modalities, and then internally shake the system, as opposite to just remain silent and like refuse to participate, and then just let it be, because it's gonna work without us anyway. We might as well get on board and try to shake it and try to put on our perspective.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I think across all of the panelists' answers, a really common theme was to really know yourself and know why you want to go. What do you want to accomplish and what do you want to get out of this experience at COP? Which is really, I think, profound, and to, avoid this phenomenon of being a COP tourist, as Chanel mentioned earlier. This kind of goes into our next question. A lot of the folks in the audience might already have a Blue Zone badge or are already confirmed to be attending COP29. And so for those of us who already have a Blue Zone badge for COP29, do you folks know of any opportunities for youth to be more involved, hands-on? So not just as an observer, but are there actually any opportunities for youth to speak or to participate in panels, organize events, etc.? Anyone can jump in.
I
Chanel?
can start, yeah. I think it might be a little too late to organize any side events. I think most of the forums might have closed by now. But I think in terms of participating as a youth, there's definitely a lot of opportunities still. If you're familiar with Youngo, they have tons of opportunities for young people to, join bilaterals, to help with coordination, to help with logistics. So really, if you're really keen on speaking, and just helping out in general, definitely check out Youngo. Um, I'm going to pass it on to someone else if anyone has any thoughts.
I can jump in here. I would also suggest to check out the pavilions. So there are not only country pavilions, but there are also thematic pavilions. So I just put in the chat as well. There's a children and youth pavilion that was launched in COP27, and they have a lot of amazing events and opportunities to participate as a youth speaker, or even just, to participate as an active listener. So I definitely recommend checking them out. There is I believe, there are so many pavilions for food, for SDGs, for many, many different topics. So please do check those out as well. And they have multiple events every day, usually.
Yeah, and to add to that, also starting from COP27, and that we started to have the concept of the Presidency Youth Climate Champions, there are also some initiatives that are affiliated to this. So I think most of this can be found if you subscribe to the ACE newsletter. I'll put a link to that, but also the UNFCCC webpage of these PYCC. So a couple of events are going to also be organized, be it in terms of some youth consultations, but also others that involve young people participation. But then again, every pavilion will have their own communication in terms of what they are offering and where you can join.
Exactly. I also mentioned earlier in the session, for example, that the SDG Pavilion just recently closed applications for side events. So, like Chanel said, it might be a bit late at this point. If you're looking to, speak or organize an event specifically for COP29, but in general, pavilions are a really great way, especially the children and youth or like the SDG Pavilion, to showcase the work from your community. And from personal experiences as well, I know during side events and a lot of these more panel style events, there's opportunities for participants to pose questions to the panelists on, certain thematic areas of focus or negotiations. And then obviously, if you join a workshop being held at COP, those are often interactive as well. We can move on to the next question. This is for, I guess, youth who don't possess climate-related education or a research background. They might not be, attending the next COP or planning on attending COPs either. But what is your advice for youth who do not possess climate-related education or a research background, but they are passionate and, striving to enter this field? How do you get into this space and navigate effectively? I think if Emma started answering, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the main suggestion I would have is, or the main point that I want to make is, it doesn't have to limit you that you don't have an official climate education. We have many, many people also in our team at Climate Talk that have joined from various perspectives and from various backgrounds, and not, the number of people that we've interviewed at different climate conferences. It's super interesting to hear what backgrounds they come from and what brought them to COP. So I do recommend that you also listen back to the interviews that we've conducted. We've recently posted many flashback interviews from COP28. So if you check out the Climate Talk Instagram, you can also listen to those stories of how young people have gotten to those conferences. But I would also say, watch any resources, videos. There is a lot out there. Organizations like Climate Talk, but also many others are spending many, many volunteer hours to try and make the negotiations and try and make climate policy as such accessible. So I would just say, start somewhere. It's often the starting point is the most difficult one, but I would say there is no right or wrong way to start as long as you start. So start summer, we have a very basic ABCs of Climate COPs booklet that we'll be updating. We'll be publishing the updated version next week. So do check out simple resources like that to really get started. And what I would also say is you don't necessarily have to be into research or writing to be engaged in at COP. We have many people in our team, for instance, that approach it from a social media perspective that are great at creating videos, at conducting interviews, at the social media aspect of things to make it more relatable to other people. So we really do need all different kinds of skills in the climate space and in also at COP and to make COP more transparent. So I would say please don't feel limited by your expertise or also by your skills because we do need all skills in the climate space.
Does anyone else have anything to add to Emma's answer?
Maybe to complement a little bit, yeah, for my case, I did not have a climate education. I chose to have a climate education once I started engaging and I got my degree in sustainable development. So like I chose to do that because I wanted to get more academic credibility and know what I'm talking about. But then whether you choose that your climate engagement is around COPs, whether you choose that your climate engagement is around local action in terms of mobilizing your local, I don't know, NGO or like your national level or engaging and knowing more about what your country do. It can also start by checking what your country is doing in terms of its policies, what we call the nationally determined contribution, to which extent has it been updated to be ambitious enough, to which extent does it reflect your matters or your views. So I think there is also a work to be done at the level of your local community, your national community, and it does not only have to be in terms of these global fora. Of course, this feeds into that, and then it is important that you have a knowledge about this to be actually able to know more about that, but it should not be limiting. And then again, there are a lot of resources, that the ones that Emma was mentioning, from UNICEF, from other organizations that are trying to make this space more inclusive. So it's about finding a community, knowing where to ask, and then also knowing what you exactly want to learn. It is okay that we do not learn all about the different pieces, but it's also important to know what piece is where you are more passionate about, and then try to find the way, as opposed to trying to just navigate the whole space, which can be a bit hard at the beginning.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, I think it's important to really reflect on why you want to enter the space in the first place, because the end goal doesn't necessarily have to be you attending COP. The end goal could be, helping out a local environmental initiative at home. So really, start anywhere. You can really start anywhere. There are so many organizations out there, locally, globally, continentally. So really just put yourself out there and you'll see what comes next.
Amazing answers. And one thing that I will add is that it's always good to bring this back home and bring it back to your own community. You're a spokesperson for your community when you attend COP, or you can have the context of your community in mind when you're following these international conferences. So it's really, I think, easy to get overwhelmed with such a broad scope when this is a conference that's dealing with most parts of the world, but really remember to reconnect it back to, I guess, your own lived experiences and what you want to see happen for your community. So I do know that we are drawing close to the end of this session now. If you haven't yet filled out the closing poll that Emma has shared, that would be amazing just to kind of give some feedback on this event. We hope that this was super informative. Emma and Nick, I don't know if you have anything to add on, or whether we'll be sharing the results of this poll, for example, as well as the folks who've joined from all of these places. Are there any resources that people can follow up on?
Thank you so much, Annabelle, and thank you for moderating, and thank you everybody for participating. It's been great to have such an active group and so much interest in this topic. Please do fill out the poll. We're trying to make this as useful as possible for everyone. It's not always easy when we have various backgrounds, but it also super helps if you leave any comments at what you would like to see in the future, or anything that you're struggling with. We weren't able to get to all of the questions, of course, but if there is any burning question, feel free to, of course, email us, and we'll try to help as much as we can. Do stay tuned for the resource that we are publishing with Changemaker Exchange by the end of the week, which is a COP29 youth guide, where you will have all of the important links and also many of the links that we shared today. So do follow us on our social media pages, Instagram and LinkedIn, ClimaTalk and Changemaker Exchange, and you will see the resource when it is posted. We will also post a COP29 fact sheet, as well as an updated version of our ABCs of Climate COPs booklet, which will, reiterate and re-explain also the basics around COP, which I'm sure were quite overwhelming for those of you where all of this was very new. We tried to bring as much as possible into this event, but please also don't feel bad if you did not understand everything, because even we are struggling at many points, and we've been on this for quite a while now. So please don't be too hard on yourself, and we're trying to make it as accessible as possible with our resources. I'll pass to you, Nick, if there's anything you want to share.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks so much, Emma. And just quick thank you to Annabelle too, and Amal and Chanel. Emma, awesome panelists, and covering a real diverse range of questions in a very short, quick fire time. Beautifully done. Thanks everyone a million for attending this. We super appreciate it. And just again, as Emma says, COPs are a real labyrinth. Everything from the admission system to the ethical dilemmas, to all the abbreviations. So it does take a while. I'm personally really still in my learning zone with all of this. So yeah, for some of you, maybe it's better to sit with a document and really pile into it. For others, to watch the recording, we're going to share the recording with you. Everyone who registered, you'll get the link when it's uploaded to YouTube. And then by the end of this week, we'll share with you the resource, the toolkit that Emma mentioned as well. So with that, I bring us to a close, I think. And thanks again. See some of you at COP, others online, and all the best. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Bye, everyone. Thank you for joining.